Hi, welcome back to Every Note Counts. Today we're going to look at my Mexican Stratocaster, the new American Vintage 261, and my custom shop Stratocaster. Let's get into it. Hey, so I'm editing the video right now, and I'm not sure I mentioned that my 63 custom shop guitar, I spec'd that up. I didn't buy it from a guitar store already in that condition. I got to choose all of the different specs, and so I wanted to go ahead and mention that. Also, I looked up what the inflation rate looks like between 1960 and 2022. In 1960, let me read my piece of paper here, you could buy a Stratocaster for $289.50. $30 less if you wanted hardtail. But in 60, and I know this is a 1961 Stratocaster, but in 1960 you could buy a Strat with a tremolo for $289.50. Adjusted for inflation, today that would be $2,873.78. So they're actually selling less today than they were in 1960, which is kind of interesting. I guess with the advancement in tools and machines, it allows the price to come down a bit, but I thought that was an interesting bit of information. Just as a point of reference for the cost of these guitars, I bought this Mexican Stratocaster around 2017. It was selling for about $650. Mexican Stratocasters today, called the Players series, are selling anywhere from around $800 to $1,000, but it's actually closer in price to the 61 Stratocaster, which is coming in just over $2,000, $2,099. Those two are closer in price than the 61 Stratocaster is to the almost $4,500 custom shop Strat. So let's look at some of the differences between them and see how they sound. One big difference between the three of these are the tuners. The Mexican Stratocaster has these tuners, and I'm not sure what they're exactly called, but I just kind of refer to them as regular Fender tuners. Whereas the 61 Stratocaster has the split top tuners, the vintage style. So you put the string down the center of the channel right there, and then it wraps around the outside. My 63 Stratocaster has vintage style locking tuners. So the string feeds to the center of the post, and there's a little metal cap that goes over the top of it. The string sits between this internal metal post and the metal cap, and as you turn the tuning head, it creates pressure that locks the string in place. It's a little awkward when restringing these. It's not my favorite locking tuner design, but it has the look and it does the locking tuner job. All three of these have maple necks. However, this one has a roasted maple neck. That's one of the big differences between the three. Next, the neck shape. This Mexican Stratocaster has a modern C, and interestingly, it actually feels pretty similar in girth to the 61 Stratocaster. 61 Strat is a little thicker, but not significant. It's pretty close to the modern C carve. These, however, are much smaller than the 63C that is on this custom shop. It has more heft, it fills the hand more, and I actually prefer it. I went into a guitar store and took a bunch of custom shops off the walls in order to feel the different necks that are offered on Fenders, and this one fit my hand the best, the 63C. I picked up several, and I remember thinking, I need to make a note of this. Oh, it's another 63C. So this one fits my hand the best, and it's my favorite of the three necks. Another difference between these three Stratocasters is the finish on the back of the neck. While this one I think is technically gloss, it's not high gloss. It's somewhere between, you know, satin and gloss. It's very slick, not sticky at all. The 61 has a gloss finish on the back of it that is nitro, and it was a bit sticky, and something was either coming off the neck or rolling up, either pilling a little bit or becoming a little mealy in texture. That's gone though, so I don't know what was on the outside of the neck, but it's left, and now it's very comfortable. It will inevitably get smoother and slicker to play as that nitro wears off. This has a poly finish neck that is satin. I don't like high gloss maple fretboards, and I don't like high gloss neck shapes on the back. So that one's satin all around and is very comfortable to play. I'm a big fan of medium jumbo frets. The Mexican Stratocaster has medium jumbo. The 61 has vintage tall, but they weren't awkward to play. It was perfectly comfortable and wasn't a hindrance. It didn't feel awkward to play the strings. My father owns a Stevie Ray Vaughan Stratocaster, and those jumbo frets, they just wear my fingers out. My fingers feel very sore after playing that for a while. I didn't have that problem with the vintage tall frets, and my custom shop also has medium jumbos, so it felt exactly the same as the Mexican Strat, and neither of them felt significantly different than the vintage tall frets. The radius on all three of these guitars is actually different. The Mexican Stratocaster has a 9.5-inch radius. The vintage 61 has a 7.25-inch radius. But the custom shop has what's called a vintage compound radius. It starts at 7.25 and goes to 9.5. People worry about a vintage radius choking out the note because of how arched the radius is, how curved it is. I would bend on the high E string, the 17th fret, that A note, up to the 21st fret, which is C sharp, and it choked out on my Mexican Strat, 9.5-inch radius. It choked out on the 7.25-inch radius of the 61 Strat, but it did not choke out on the vintage compound, which shifts from 7.25 to 9.5. The 9.5 radius of the custom shop towards the upper frets should be basically the same as this 9.5. But for some reason, it choked out on the Mexican Strat and not on the custom shop. So there's either a fit and finish improvement with the custom shop, or they're just set up slightly different, or the tolerances between what the guitars will actually allow someone to do with them is just enough where there's a little bit of leeway there in what note you can bend up to. But that's a 4-fret bend from 17 to 21. So I was happy to see the custom shop be able to pull through that one. The fretboard wood is different on all three of these guitars as well. We have Pau Ferro right here on this Mexican Stratocaster. That's Pau Ferro. And I'm assuming it's probably Pau Ferro on the skunk stripe. On the 61 Stratocaster, this wood is actually rosewood, but it's figured, and it has this, I think, beautiful wave to it that kind of goes up and down through the neck. When I look at it, I think to myself, I'm going to use that as a reminder to really concentrate on bends instead of using muscle memory. Try to take what's in my head and make it artistically kind of come out of my fingers. Take what's in your brain and express it with your fingers. So I know originally I was really looking forward to a dark slab of rosewood, but the way that this one came out, that almost paintbrush style, but with a swoosh going around the fretboard, I decided I really liked it, and it gave a personality to this guitar that will hopefully be different than a lot of the other 61s that they make and produce. Lastly, the custom shop is one solid piece of roasted maple. The fretboard is the same piece of wood as the neck, and it has what I'm assuming is a regular maple skunk stripe on the back, as opposed to the roasted maple. The finishes are obviously different between these three guitars. You have a flamed maple veneer with a burst finish on the Mexican Stratocaster. You have classic Olympic white, and then you have what's called transparent ebony finish on the custom shop Stratocaster. This one is polyurethane finished, this one is nitro finished, and this custom shop is nitro finished as well. We also have a difference in pickups between these three. We have the Fat 60s pickups in the Mexican Stratocaster. In general, they feel fuller, but they still retain a lot of note definition. Sometimes, at least to my ear, the fuller, thicker sounding pickups border on muddy, and it becomes harder to hear note definition between the strings for chords. These have a fullness to them, but still retain note clarity and definition, which I really appreciate. The 61s are obviously brighter than the Fat 60s, but they're not as bright as the 69s. The 69s are the lowest output of the three, from what I understand. I've not seen the specs on the 61 Stratocaster pickups, but the 69s are very vintage and very underwound. They definitely have more treble than both the Fat 60s and the 61. I say all this with a grain of salt though, because obviously adjusting the height of the pickups can shift these around a little bit. I didn't put all the pickups in the same configuration. I left them as they came to me from the store, except for, I should say, the Mexican Stratocaster, because we did replace those pickups from the regular pickups that came in it to Fat 60s. However, I'm almost positive I took measurements of the height of those pickups when I replaced them so that they would be the same height after installing the Fat 60s as they were beforehand. All three sets of pickups have good note definition. I would say that the 69s have the clearest definition between the strings, and they also have a lot of brightness, but it is not a tinny, ice picky, weak, or brittle sound. And the last point I wanted to talk about is the bridge. We have a 6-point trim system for the Mexican Strat with a screw-in tremolo arm, obviously. The 61 is also a 6-screw bridge with a screw-in tremolo arm. And the custom shop is a 2-point trim with a pop-in tremolo arm. In the previous video I made, there were some concerns about the neck pocket and the perceived gap in that neck pocket. This is not a concern of mine. I really feel that the contact between the pieces of wood, especially solidified by the 4 bolts, those 4 big screws, is providing plenty of transfer in regards to the vibration and resonance of the guitar. I'm fine with there being some space in the neck pocket as the guitar expands and contracts depending on the heat and humidity of the situation. And unless the neck starts to significantly shift, which it shouldn't shift up or down, left or right, thanks to those 4 giant screws, unless it becomes problematic, it's an aesthetic issue. Unless there becomes an actual problem with how the neck is fitting in that joint, I'm not going to worry about it. That being said, some of you felt very strongly about the neck pocket, and if you feel differently, please comment below. I'd love to hear why you think it is a big deal or is not a big deal. So who walks away with the title of the Ultimate Stratocaster? I think it's very clear that it's this carbon-built bolt-on. Look at that beautiful swamp ash finish. Look at the string-through body instead of a tremolo. Carbon fiber reinforced neck, perfectly fine tuning heads, special AP11 pickups that allow you to adjust the individual pull height and the overall height of the pickup themselves, stainless steel frets, ebony fretboard. This thing is a machine and clearly wins. I say that a bit in jest. This guitar really does deserve its own video. It's a beauty, but it felt weird to compare it to non-Fender Stratocasters in a video that was specifically geared towards the differences in Fender models. Each one of these guitars I would use for something different. I would probably not take the nitro finished ones across country in an airplane with big temperature fluctuations and the potential of it getting damaged or lost. I really enjoy just playing those here at home, which is where 98% of my playing occurs. I would, however, take the Carvin with me across country because I paid just over $1,000 back in, I think, 2015 for this guitar. And it has those carbon fiber rods going down the neck, making it nice and strong. I would trust this in a variety of different environments and temperature fluctuations, so this would probably be my long-distance travel guitar. I would use my Mexican Strat for local gigs or maybe taking in a plane across country. That way, if it got damaged or stolen, I'd be sad, but I wouldn't be absolutely heartbroken like I would be if I lost either the 61 or the Custom Shop Stratocaster. Hey, it's me again. I'm in the middle of editing, but I wanted to make sure I mentioned the pickup specs. If you walk into a guitar store, you might see a $1,600, $1,700 Stratocaster, and they have the VMod 2 pickups in them. I couldn't find any information on a difference between those pickups and the VMod 1s, but here are the specs for the VMod 1s. Also, here are the specs for the Texas Specials. You can see that it's a higher output. Now, I've got 69 pickups in my custom shop, so that's what these look like. And these are the specs for the Fat 60s. Do with that information what you will. Obviously, pickup height adjustment and then angling the pickup to increase bass or decrease treble allows for some wiggle room in how those end up sounding in the guitar, but that's the information that Fender puts out for their pickups. Now comes the Play-Doh test, which I teased in my YouTube thumbnail. I took the guitars and I pressed them into Play-Doh in order to create a mold of the neck so that we could compare the different shapes of the guitars at the nut, the 5th fret, and the 12th fret. Let's see what that process looked like. So we are going to start with the Mexican Stratocaster. I'm going to align the nut with the cardboard, and there's a little bit of spillover in the Play-Doh down to the bottom of the cardboard so that it should all be even, and I should just be able to press the bone nut in there and kind of form the Play-Doh around where the nut is. I'm going to bring it out a little bit more so that it can push against it. I'm using my index finger as a guide on the bottom to make sure that the Play-Doh, that there's no gap. There we go. Last thing I need is a gap throwing off the measurements. Okay, pushing the Play-Doh into the neck as I'm pushing the neck into the Play-Doh. What I really need to do is make sure that the bottom is accurate, because the bottom of the Play-Doh is accurate where it's touching the neck, because that is where I'm going to take my measurement. And we're not looking at depth of the neck so much as we are looking at shape. So that's as good as I'm going to be able to get that one. Okay, and it looks snug, and it removes, and it maintained its shape. Okay, I'm happy with that. Next, we're going to move on to the 61 Stratocaster. Again, I'm going to use my fingers to work the Play-Doh around the neck, right at the nut, so that we're taking a measurement from the exact same place on all three guitars. I did a test run of this with another guitar to see how badly the Play-Doh was going to stick to the back of the neck. It was fine. And also whether or not the Play-Doh would hold shape. Last one is the 63C. Scoot this Play-Doh out some more. I need the Play-Doh to compress back as the neck goes in, but I also need it to form to the correct shape and there not be any gaps, obviously. Okay, let's check out what our measurements were for all of these. The next thing we have to do is actually draw the curve here. So what I need is to get the Play-Doh up next to the paper, and I've chosen a marker that drops ink pretty easy so I don't have to push too hard. That way I can get right up to the edge of the Play-Doh without pushing the Play-Doh into pushing the Play-Doh back, because obviously that would very much throw off the whole purpose of mapping the shape of the neck. There we go. Then you end up with something like that. So this is nut, made in Mexico. 61, nut, 63C. Okay. We'll cut those out, and I'm just going to oh, no, I won't mess with that. We're going to cut them out and overlay them and see how those look. I'm going to go ahead and do these next measurements at the 5th fret. 61 Strat at the 5th fret. 63 at the 5th fret. Let's take those measurements. Last round here, we will do 12th fret. Here comes the 61 Strat, 12th fret. Lastly, we have the 63 Stratocaster. All right, let's check those measurements. Okay, let's compare them. As you can see, I kind of lightly drew when I was in there. I was trying to be really careful not to displace the Play-Doh on the back of the neck, because that would very much throw off the measurements. So here are the nuts, and you can see that the MIM, made in Mexico, has, I'm going to flip this one over, the 61 over, so you can see the difference. The MIM is a little bit, has a little bit less shoulder. There's more along the edge here in the 61. I'm just going to go ahead and make this dark. This is going to be the one of biggest difference. So to visualize that easiest, make that dark. And then let's see the biggest extremes. This one here. You can see the black overhang. Use this piece of paper so that the textured counter is not throwing you off. You can see the black overhang for the 63. Here's the 61. So it is definitely thicker. Moving on to the 5th fret, we'll see how these look midway up the neck. That's where I do most of my thumb over playing, is obviously between the 3rd fret and the 10th fret. So in standard tuning, you know, between G and D. So there's the 63 at the 5th, made in Mexico. Pretty significant difference there. You can see that there's way more shoulder. There's a slower slope, and then it jumps, and then it becomes a drastic fall off on either side. This is going to be similar to the 61. 61 6 over the 63 neck at the 5th fret. Yep. Let me angle that better. There you go. You can see that. Align the apexes. It's just more of the shoulder. There's more of that on the 63 for sure. But since the modern C is the one that we will all have the most familiarity with, let's overlay that again with the 61. Here's the made in Mexico. And you can see that there's definitely more shoulder. There is more shoulder on the 61 at the 5th fret. Lastly, we do have the 63C at the 12th, the 61 at the 12th, and the made in Mexico at the 12th. So compared to the 61 at the 12th, align the apexes. That's interesting. Those are pretty similar at the 12th. So once it gets to the 12th, the 61 catches up. It catches up to the 63. You know, a little bit thicker right there, but it's got good overlap. That's okay. Maybe it's a little wider. Let's just check that. Okay, that's very interesting. So the 61 gets wider at the 12th, whereas the 63 maintains its curve. 61 gets wider. That's interesting. Okay, now let's overlay the Mexican Strat with this. Mexican Strat at the 12th. I think it's easy to conclude that it is also thinner. Yeah, so the 61 has more shoulder on it. Here's the 63. And although you can't really see it, this would be, we can't tell from these measurements, but it would be thicker on the, that goes away. The Made in Mexico is wider than the 63 at the 12th fret. I'm going to color this so we can see the difference. Interesting. So it's wider. The Made in Mexico Modern C is wider than the 63. But the 63 is going to be deeper in regards to the thickness of the neck. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that was illuminating. It's very difficult to film the necks and show them. That's why you often hear guitarists and guitar channels discussing how the neck feels in their hands. This is as close as I can get to demonstrating how the neck feels at different frets. I hope that was helpful. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you next time here on Every Note Counts.